they had the potential to cross over to top 40 radio. They did it all, and they did it all very well. And they remain sort of a treasure for those in the know. People that know about Y&T tend to know them very well. And then some people might know the name and they might think of them as a one-hit wonder, which makes sense from a chart point of view. And then some people just don't know who you're talking about. Those, you say the name and they're like, what, why, what are you saying? It was a foregone conclusion that if I was ever going to write a book about one band, chances are the first thing I came out with would be Y&T.
Tim Durling has returned as promised. We would not lie to you. Tim, hey man, welcome back. It's good to see you again. It's been such a long time. You look wonderful.
I know, it seems like forever, right?
Yeah. So we promised to have you back on. The first one was for the Unspooled book, which we had a blast talking about. Now let's get to some Y&T, which this is cool for me. I'm not now I am. Wasn't a huge Y&T fan going in. I knew about a song or two. There you go. I knew about a song or two from the band, and now I'm realizing why you are such a fan. This is an outstanding band, and I wanted to get into some of the songs and the albums and the amazing musicianship. So let's get to all that. First, though, let's talk about when did you become a fan? How did you become a fan?
Well, you just summed it up right there. The reason that I did this book, Eric. I mean, I always thought for a while, since I got into the band, that all people that are into this type of hard rock music need to do is hear them, you know? So I got into the band in 1990, and that was when they released their 10 album, which was the second one they put out for Geffen. And I caught the video for Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, which was the first single they put out. And it's a fantastic, like, mid-tempo ballad. And I'd heard of Y&T and I'd heard Summertime Girls, but Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, I was like, this is just right up my alley. This is the type of music I like. And I remember it so vividly. It was right at the end of grade 10. You know, summer was just about to get underway. And I thought, okay, here's a band that I've heard about on the periphery. It's time to get into Y&T. And that summer I found everything I could find from them, and I just got completely hooked on the band.
Were they playing their songs on the radio where you're from in Canada?
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. No.
Same here. Just Summertime Girls here in the U.S.
One time I caught the video on Much Music on Canada's MTV was probably the one time it got played. We had, MTV had Headbangers Ball. Much Music had a show called The Power Hour. Same idea, hard rock and metal. And that's where I happened to catch the Y&T video. And I recorded it on a videotape and watched it over and over and over again. And it went from there. And that summer, like, I just went full on into this band. And for years, I didn't know, other than friends of mine that I kind of turned on to them, I didn't know anybody that had even heard of the band, never mind were into them. It was a long time.
Let's talk about the history of the band. So they're from San Francisco.
Yeah.
Right.
San Francisco Bay Area. They formed in 1974. So it's actually their 50th anniversary now. And the original lineup, as far as, on record, was Dave Meniketti. Dave is the lead vocalist and the lead guitar player. Phil Kennemore, bass player, and background vocalist and co-lead vocalist sometimes. Joey Alves was like dedicated rhythm guitar. He would do the occasional lead, but mostly he just stuck to the rhythm. And drummer Leonard Hayes. That was the original Y&T lineup that people got to know. Unfortunately, the crazy thing is about time, Dave Meniketti's the last man standing. The other three guys have all passed away over the years. So that lineup was intact. Their first album was self-titled, came out in 1976. Originally, they were called Yesterday and Today. The full name was printed out, named after a Beatles album. So that name lasted for their first album in 76 and their second album in 78 called Struck Down. And those two albums came out on London Records, which kind of went under as the second album was just coming out. So was another 3 years before people heard from them again. They had already sort of made a name for themselves in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then also playing places like Azari's and the Whiskey a Go Go, and bands like Quiet Riot and Dokken and Rat all cut their teeth going to see Y&T. You know, it's never been talked about much, but I think Van Halen as well.
Yeah, I
I
was going to
think,
ask
you know,
if they,
there,
if they were part of
there
that.
was a, you know, there was a definite, all these bands were playing that circuit, and Y&T were doing it early. Even Lars Ulrich has stated that when he first moved from Denmark to California, he was a fan of Yesterday and Today, and he would go and see them underage play. So definitely an influential band. They signed with A&M Records, and that's when they sort of had their most successful period between 81 and 85. So they put Earthshaker out in 81, Black Tiger in 82. Their first album to chart in 83 was Mean Streak, the title song from that, one of their better known songs. Their biggest album was in 1984, In Rock We Trust. It almost went gold. And I've said many times, if Universal did not it might be a gold record now. It went to peaked at 46 on Billboard. It was their biggest selling album. Next year, they put out the single Summertime Girls. That became their most successful single. That peaked at number 55 on Billboard. So it got a lot of top 40 stations playing it, just not enough to crack into the top 40. The video got a lot of play on MTV. Unfortunately, I say this a lot. I don't think A&M were that great a label when it comes to hard rock and heavy metal. I don't think they knew what to do with this band. So then they signed to Geffen Records, which on the surface seemed like a good move. It certainly worked for Whitesnake. It worked for Aerosmith. Didn't work for Y&T. They did 2 records on Geffen. They did Contagious in 1987. And as I said before, 10 in 1990. And by that time, you know, when it became apparent that 10 wasn't going to be a big hit, they decided to knock it on the head. So I'll talk about the lineup changes real quick. Between A&M and Geffen, so around 1986, Leonard Hayes left, and he was replaced by a drummer that a lot of people know the name, Jimmy DeGrasso. Jimmy went on to play with Alice Cooper, Megadeth, with Suicidal Tendencies, Black Star Riders. You know, he's Lita Ford. He's played with a lot of different groups. So then Joey Alves, rhythm guitar, left, and then he was replaced by Steph Burns. So that was the lineup that did the 10 album and their final, you know, what they called their farewell tour. The hiatus only lasted about 4 years, and then they were back in that lineup. They did a couple of independent albums in the mid to late 90s, Musically Incorrect and Endangered Species. A lot of touring. The lineup was revamped in, I want to say around 2003, sometime around there. In the process, Dave Meniketti had put in a couple solo records. But Steph Burns left. They got John Nyman. Now, John Nyman was a longtime friend of the band. He'd known them forever. He's a Bay Area guitar player. He got started. His major label start was part of Eric Martin's band for Mr. Big when he was a solo artist. So John joined the band, and Leonard Hayes was eventually left, or was asked to leave, whatever. He was replaced by a guy named Mike Vanderheel. Since after that, I'm trying to think what the next thing was. Oh, so you had the 2 main guys, Dave Meniketti, lead singer, lead guitar player, and bassist Phil Kennemore. They were like the Paul and Gene of Y&T. It was always those 2 guys, and they changed like second guitar player and drummer. Phil Kennemore sadly passed away from cancer in 2011. He was replaced by a guy named Brad Lang. Brad played with a bunch of different people. He used to be in a band called Jet Red. I think nowadays he's with the Bullet Boys. He didn't last. He lasted a few years. Then he was replaced by Aaron Lee. And that's the lineup today is Dave Meniketti, John Nyman, Aaron Lee, Mike Vanderheel. They're still touring. So far, the last album they put out was an album called Face Melter in 2010. And I just think that they should have been every bit as big as Van Halen. Maybe not as big as Van Halen, okay, but as big as Rat, as big as Motley, as big as, you know, that level of band. They should have been a band that could sell millions and millions of albums. I think they had the potential to cross over to a metal audience, old school metal, They had the potential to cross over to top 40 radio. They did it all, and they did it all very well. And they remain sort of a treasure for those in the know. People that know about Y&T tend to know them very well. And then some people might know the name and they might think of them as a one-hit wonder, which makes sense from a chart point of view. And then some people just don't know who you're talking about. Those, you say the name and they're like, what, why, what are you saying? I ran into that a lot when I was in school. So it was a foregone conclusion that if I was ever going to write a book about one band, chances are the first thing I came out with would be Y&T.
Wow.
Because there's never, ever been a book about them, ever.
Yeah, this is the first book ever on the band.
As far as I know, people have asked me that a lot. And I said, look, we may find out someday that they put out, a book in Japan in 1985 because they were fairly big in Japan, but I don't think so. No one has come to me and said, actually there was a Y&T book, but either way, there wasn't one quite like this. I just don't think there was one. I think this is the only one. There have been books that mention them, but I think this is the only one that's dedicated to them.
Wow. And Manichetti, that name was familiar to me through guitar magazines. I think he was well respected, is well respected among the guitar community. And is it also fair to compare them? Would they be like America's version of UFO? Because UFO in the UK is that similar situation where how come they didn't get bigger than they were? UFO's got a huge following and an outstanding band.
You know what? I'm not savvy on UFO. I'm not familiar. I mean, I know like Lights Out and a couple other songs, but I do know that they are a well-respected band. And yeah, in the UK, they were fairly big. Thin Lizzy too. Thin Lizzy's another
one. Yeah. Although at least Thin Lizzy had those they had a few big hit singles. Y&T has one, Summertime Girls, but it is similar. Yeah. You call them one of hard rock's best kept secrets.
Absolutely, they are. And a lot of people too, if you grew up in the 80s and you were really into the hard rock and metal scene, you'll also know Dave from the Hearing Aid song Stars. After Ronnie James Dio, Dave's the first voice you hear on that song. Sometimes in the night when you're feeling the cold, that's Dave Manichetti. He sings on that song. He sings some great ad libs at the end. Ronnie James, people in the industry knew. Ronnie James Dio knew he was great. Dee Snider knew he was great. They got all kinds of good opening slots, special guest slots. Like they toured with the biggest of names in this genre. They just never cracked. They just never cracked completely through. And I have to think that it was record label, maybe some bad record label decisions. And they didn't really have what you'd call high-powered management. It was just sort of like local. They were managed by a guy named Scott Bourret for years, who I'm sure he was a great guy. He figures in on, the production of some of their albums. But, if they'd have been managed by, say, Q Prime or, who else? Doc McGee, any of the big name managers that could sort of the movers and shakers in that world, they might have had something. And then there is the case of maybe the name was a little confusing, So what happened after those first two albums? They gained a pretty big following in their home area, the Bay Area, and surrounding, and then in other pockets in the U.S. But mostly it was like a Bay Area thing. But their fans would always chant Y&T. They always shortened the name. So when they signed A&M Records, they just decided to go with the shortened version of the name. And I think it does have a ring to it. They came up with a cool logo for it. But, it might have caused some confusion. People might have thought, well, what is that, a duo? Or what does it stand for? What kind of music is it? But so the big discussion among fans is like, well, was it management? Was it the record label? And what we keep coming back to is because it wasn't the music. The music was exactly what it should have been. And they should have, there are places where they could have broken through at so many points in their career. It was a slow build. And A&M Records, they put out the ads, they put out the promo singles, they did these things. But when In Rock We Trust came out, this is 1984. I mean, this is the perfect time for this sort of music. This is when Rat and Scorpions and Autograph. We're having top 40 singles, where a few years ago it was unheard of for bands that had heavy distorted guitars to have any kind of top radio success, top 40 radio success. So here comes Y&T with their most accessible album yet, and it struggles to hit 46. And it's estimated it sold about 450,000 copies in its first run in the States. So people that don't know, 500,000 is gold status. And that should have broken them through. So then by the time Summertime Girls came out, Summertime Girls should have done for Y&T what Jump did for Van Halen. Yes, it was a song, was uber poppy. It really didn't represent them. It was very keyboardy. But then Jump was quite a departure for Van Halen. I'm not saying it would have been a #1 song, but I'm saying it should have done better than it did. And unfortunately, because it was the only song to garner any amount of airplay, there's probably people that think, well, that's probably what their music tends to sound like. It's not. They don't even have a keyboard player in the band.
Yeah. Wow. Now, here's a name that's very familiar, and I already mentioned this to you while we weren't recording last time. Hugh Syme does the artwork for your book. How did you get him to do this? Hugh Syme, for those who may not know, Rush fans know who he is.
Oh, yeah.
He's an award-winning graphic artist who's worked with pretty much everybody in the business. Album covers, did so many great album covers. Yeah, how'd you get him?
It's pretty mind-blowing to this day, you know, because Y&T and Rush are probably my two favorite bands, you know, and Hugh started working with Rush from the Crest of Steel album onward. So it's only the first two Rush albums that he didn't do the artwork for. Every tour book, every home video, posters, it's all Hugh Syme artwork. He's the guy. He's the Rush artwork guy. He is what Rush, you know, like Roger Dean is to Yes. You know, it's a very distinctive style. But Hugh also branched out, and he's done print ads, he's done TV, he's done all kinds of different things. But you know, people that are into our genre, hard rock and metal, I can list off a ton of I bet you anybody watching this, you've got at least one album in your music collection that Hugh Syme did a cover for. I don't care.
Bon Jovi,
what.
New Jersey.
Bon Jovi, New Jersey, which very much was inspired by the Whitesnake 1987 album cover. Whitesnake Slip of the Tongue, the Coverdale Page album, Whitesnake Restless Heart, Aerosmith Get a Grip. That doesn't really look like a Hugh Syme cover, but it is. Kiss Revenge, Megadeth Countdown to Extinction, Euthanasia, Iron Maiden The X Factor, Queensryche, Promised Land, Here in the Now Frontier, the Sign of the Times compilation.
Man,
Tesla Busted Nut is a Hugh Syme cover. And
Slaughter, Stick It To You.
No, I don't.
It's on Wikipedia. I don't always have to believe.
Maybe, I don't know. That one didn't come. But yeah, I mean, he definitely worked.
Warrant, Cherry Pie.
He did Cherry Pie. He did Great White Hooked. You're helping me think of a few more.
Yeah.
Well, just let me look at my collection here.
Yeah, I just quickly went to Wikipedia.
Night
he did
Ranger,
Kiss's
Man in
Revenge.
Motion,
Which one? Night Ranger what?
Man in Motion.
Okay.
Yeah, Kiss Revenge.
Yeah.
So, you know, Kiss fans tend to know who did everything. So, yes, that's a name. And he started working with Dream Theater in about 2005, and I think he's done everything for them since then, which kind of makes sense because Dream Theater is sort of like the modern day. I mean, they're not modern now, but they were sort of like the modern day Rush when they came out.
Megadeth. He did the Countdown to Extinction, and this is interesting. The Band. He did the '93 album by the band Jericho.
I mean, he's wow. Canadian, right? He's Canadian by way of England, but he grew up in England. Yeah. Okay. So Hugh Syme and Glenn Webster did do the cover art for "Stick It To You."
Yep.
Yeah. I wouldn't have thought that was a Hugh Syme, because usually you look at enough of them and you go, you can kind of tell.
Yeah. He did the Bacon Brothers, Kevin Bacon and his brother, 2001's Can't Complain.
He's done a lot of Canadian acts that people in the States might not be aware of, like Max Webster, Kim Mitchell, Honeymoon Suite, Helix. Even if it's just one album, the fact is that you've probably got something that Hugh Syme designed in your repertoire.
Yeah, man.
So what happened So I'll tell you, I take forever to get to anything, and
That's okay.
that, but I'm passionate about this, and this was such an adventure because I never thought this would end up happening as far as the cover. But the first person I reached out to, as far as art directors were concerned, was another name people will recognize. I think John Taylor Dismukes. John Taylor Dismukes has a really distinct style. He did Keel, The Right to Rock, and The Final Frontier. He did Lynch Mob, Wicked Sensation. He did Winger and The Heart of the Young. And he did probably the visually the best known Y&T albums, Black Tiger, Mean Streak, and In Rock We Trust, right in a row. Those all have a very distinctive look to them. And I think they're just like, especially Black Tiger and Mean Streak, I think that those are just the coolest looking album covers. I reached out to him just to see if I could get some stories from him, and I never heard back. And just on a whim, I reached out to Hugh Syme because Hugh Syme designed the cover for Contagious. He did a lot of work for Geffen and John Kolodner. That's how he ended up working for Whitesnake. He did the last Black and Blue album in Heat. He ended up working a lot with Geffen and with John Kolodner, and Contagious was another one of those projects. So, and lo and behold, he emailed me back, which I was never expecting. And I'm just trying to keep it cool, right? This is Hugh Syme. Like, this is a big, like, he's like as far as designers go, he's like a rock star in the design world because I've got so many examples of his artwork.
Hell yes.
So all I wanted to ask him was what he remembered about working on that album, because I know that, these designers, it's their job. They don't necessarily have to like the band they're working for. They don't have to necessarily know anything about their music. Here's, you got a band, this is the kind of music they do. This is what they want to call the album. Go, so with Contagious, if people don't know what it looks like, it's basically like someone threw a vial or a test tube of something, some sort of liquid, and it explodes. And then it's got like a sunset underneath of it. It's a really cool cover, really striking. And it's one of my favorite uses of the Y&T logo. It's all in gold and it just looks really cool. And basically he said that, he mainly remembered working with Kolodner. He didn't remember so much working directly with the band. But I mean, it would be hard when you've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of albums. I don't know how you could remember each one of them, especially when they were just one-offs, like one per band. It's like, yeah, I think maybe I did that one. I don't know.
Yeah. Just another day's work.
So we actually ended up having a phone conversation, which was, a pretty big deal. And I'd heard him in interviews before, so I knew what he sounded like. It's like, well, that's him that I'm talking to. And he could talk for hours about, he's a musician in his own right, but a lot of stories about working with Rush and conversations with Neil Peart, which was just like, this is amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
And at a certain point, Hugh said, or asked me, he said, Tim, have you got anybody working on a cover for this book for you? And that took me completely by surprise. Did Hugh Syme just ask if I wanted him to design the book cover?
Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and I really had to, but I really had to stress to him. I said, Hugh, that would be absolutely amazing, but it's not just low budget, it's no budget. I'm just me. I don't have a publisher or an agent or anything. And he said, well, think about it. It might be fun. And so that's when we had this phone conversation. Long story short, he made me a very generous offer. I'm sure that it was just, like below minimum wage for a Hugh Syme project. But, and I had an idea initially that I wanted to do something like what Hugh did for Rush on their live album, Exit Stage Left, which, for those that aren't into Rush, basically it reprises icons and images from the previous albums to that point, and they're all, and it's up to people to find them in the, but he had a really good point. He said, you're talking about, Amazon. This is going to be through Amazon, because I told him that. You're talking about thumbnails, right? You need something that will stand out. I said, you know what? You're Hugh Syme. This is what the book's called. This is what it's on. Do your thing. And he came back to me with this gorgeous steampunk looking cover. And my first reaction, the first thing I thought of was like, this looks like something he would do for Queensryche. This looks like Promised Land or Here in the Now Frontier. It's got those brown hues to it. I loved it. He's got the tea in the foreground, the today and the yesterday in the background. Just amazing. And the really, really cool thing about it, and I didn't notice this for quite a while, is that sitting on top of the tea is a beaker full of some sort of caustic liquid. And there's steam coming off it.
Yeah.
Like that's a nod to the Contagious album cover that he designed.
Oh, man.
So I'm like, that is perfect. Perfect.
Wow.
And there is no question that having Hugh Syme's name attached sold me some books. I know it did. I'm very proud of the inner contents, of course, but that name means something to people in our world. So I know people looked at that and go, Hugh Syme? Okay, this guy must be for real. Let's check it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how that came down. It's pretty mind-blowing. I mean, to have email conversations with Hugh Syme, I haven't talked to him in a while, but I mean, he made a post about the book once it was out, and he's very good about promoting it. And it just
this came out last summer, I think, right? Was it?
Came out in December.
Oh, that's right. Late.
Yeah.
2023. Okay.
Yeah.
I think Unspooled was like last summer, May or June of last.
Yeah, last summer. It's like around September is when it appeared on Amazon. It had been out as a Kickstarter project for 2 years at that point, but I didn't think that there were ever going to be any more copies of that one until I brought it over to Amazon. But yeah, the Y&T book was the first one to just strictly come out as an Amazon print to order, and it came out just perfectly. And one of the things that I love about it is, unlike Unspooled, this isn't full color because it just costs so much to make it full color. But the way that the black and white photos translate, they came out very, very well.
Yeah.
And all of these, everything you see in this book, these are all from my own collection.
Okay. All
of these, the albums, the singles, the DVDs, all of that stuff. It's all my stuff. And it was pretty a pretty amazing process. I've met a lot of Y&T fans since doing this. I had a lot of cool people help me with the book.
Well, the forward, Sean Kelly, I think, is the same Sean Kelly who was on this podcast. He had the book "Don't Call It Hair Metal."
Absolutely,
that's the same Sean Kelly.
John's okay. super duper guy. I
awesome guy.
Fairly often. That is a great book. I'm also a huge fan of Coney Hatch. They're another unsung band that I just love, and he's their current guitar player. He plays with the Air, and he's played with a ton of people.
Yeah, he was telling me he was on one of those cruises with all these bands, Winger and you name it. Yeah,
Don't Call It Hair Metal. I recommend anybody from our era read that book. That summed up so much of what I've always thought about this type of music. But yeah, he was great. He wrote a fantastic foreword to it, and he told me, he said, "Man, I was always aware of this band, but you've really got me checking out their albums now." And to me, that's the gratifying thing. And that's all I've ever tried to do since I got into this band is like, if you like this band and this band and this band, you'll probably like Y&T. You just got to hear them. And sometimes it takes somebody that, the name to get, Sean Kelly. Oh, okay, cool. Martin Popoff, you've had Martin. Martin Popoff talked about, I've got him on the chapters about the first 3 albums. Great. He did great as usual. Pete Pardo from Sea of Tranquility is in here.
They're all part of this. If you want to talk about that too, how the book is set up, you have a varied list of writers and YouTubers and music fans offering their views on the catalog.
This book is very much based on Martin's series of books that he calls Album by Album. And they're panel books where you get a panel of people. However many people you want per album, you ask them all the same question and you get their answers, whether you do it via Zoom or whether they type them out and send them to you. That's how you gather this content. And I really liked the Queen one that Martin did, the album by album. I've read that I don't know how many times. I've got his Rush one too. And he's got other ones, but those are the only two that I have. But I said, yeah, I can see me doing something like that. And, Martin and I have talked a lot, and I flat out asked him, you know, are you ever planning on doing a Y&T book? And he said, no, I don't think so. He did some of those little ye old metal, like the 99 cent, audio books and stuff. And he really likes the first few albums, but he's not a big fan of like the commercial stuff. I'm a fan of all of it. And, but he did say, kind of like the Unspooled, he kind of planted the seed. He said, no, I wasn't planning on doing one, but somebody should. So I thought, okay. I mean, it's almost like all my years of being a fan prepared me for for doing this. And
Right.
already having a book under my belt, I'm like, I can do this. I know that I can do a book. It's just, how am I going to do this one? So I really went with that album by album. I just couldn't call it album by album. That's kind of his thing. And one of his publishers they get a little territorial about the name. I said, that's okay. So we went back and forth, and Martin's actually the one that suggested Down for the Count, which is, of course, one of their albums. It's not one of their, more highly looked upon albums, but as a title, it makes sense. We're not counting them down, but we're talking about each one. So, Down for the Count, the Y&T album review.
Well,
And so that
he brings up a point. This is, for me, it's the same experience. Like, now I'm listening to all of their music because of the book. So thank you for that. But he brings up something that maybe my favorite aspect of Y&T, especially those first two albums, which Martin is a fan of, the double bass pedal work of Leonard Hayes. Like on that first album, self-titled.
Except it's not double bass.
It's not?
It's a single bass pedal. Leonard.
That's even more impressive to me.
He was just born and blessed with an incredibly fast right foot. And he could do these really insane bass patterns with one foot. That's what he was known for in drum circles.
25 hours a day is the one that blew me away.
Oh yeah, he'll do it. Boom, boom, boom.
That's
boom,
off
boom,
that first album.
Super, insane drum patterns. I got to tell you, if you're interested in Y&T, and thank you, by the way, for your kind words about the book. But for anybody who's into Y&T and wants to know more, yes, buy the book. But go to the band's website and get yourself a copy of this.
On with the show.
The documentary. This is the story of Y&T. This is as complete as anything you could ever hope for. I learned so much watching this, and I thought I knew a lot about this band. It's narrated by Eddie Trunk, and it is, if you combine the main documentary on disc 1 with the extra features that are on disc 2, you've got hours and hours and hours of material.
Well, Eddie Trunk's the one that really championed UFO. That's how I became a UFO fan.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I've been trying to reach Eddie for months because I know he's such a fan. I just, even to send him a book and get him to talk about it. But that's another story. But
keep trying. I'd love to hear you on his show.
In this documentary, they talk to Don Dokken, Eric Martin, Frankie Hannon from Tesla, Sammy Hagar, Steve Smith from Journey. Really
Sammy's
cool
a fan,
article.
huh? Sammy's a Y&T fan.
Yeah, I mean, cool. So
he's from the San Fran area.
And if I had to describe Y&T, Dave Meniketti, he's not a clone, but he kind of has a similar voice to Sammy, a similar set of pipes. That's the easiest comparison I could come up with. The easiest band I can compare Y&T is Van Halen in general, because they're kind of this combination of like the David Lee Roth era music with a Sammy type vocal. Dave can sing just about anything in the hard rock context. He can sing ballads. He can sing, more commercial minded material. He can sing heavy stuff. Like he's just.
No, and you noted
while playing lead guitar.
Yes, that's what a talent. But you noted how, I think it's in the book, his voice got better as the albums.
I think so, yeah, because he was the reluctant lead singer, right? He thought, well, we'll get a front man eventually, but he just got better at it, and pretty soon, yeah, okay, and that's I don't know why it matters, but people have said, well, maybe that's the reason they didn't really break. They didn't have a front man. Well, not every band has a front man. It certainly didn't hurt Cinderella. And there's a band with a lead singer that played lead guitar. So you never know. Who else is in the documentary? Bobby Blotzer, Oh, there's so many people the drummer from Saxon, Nigel Glockler.
Okay.
They talked to some of the producers that worked on the Y&T albums, like Max Norman, Chris Tsangarides, who's now no longer with us, Tom Allen, and just the insights. And they talked to every member that's been in the band. They even talked to a couple of guys that were in an early version of the band that I didn't even know about, like before their first album came out.
Wow.
So that's the kind of stuff that you learn from watching this. But it tells the story so well that you come to the end of it. It is so worth the money to pay for this. It came out in 2019, so it's fairly up to date, and I would recommend it to anybody. Their website is kind of hard. You can't use an ampersand in a URL, so it's YANDTRocks.com. That's their website. I think
Okay.
this is still available. They really need to restock their web store as far as CDs go, but I think you can still get this on DVD or Blu-ray.
Okay.
I was supposed to be talking about my book, but when you mentioned, wanting to know more about the band, this is an excellent.
Yeah.
It's one of the best rock documentaries I have ever seen. Another guy that I talked to the book in depth is I've been buddies with him for years and years and years. A guy named Jeff Keir, also known as Rowdy J. Jeff was Y&T's webmaster for many years, and he was also the moderator on their forum when their forum was active. That was one of the first forums I joined when I first got a home computer, because I wanted to know more about the band. I wanted to meet more Y&T fans. The band members themselves would pop in occasionally, but I got to know Jeff really well. So when it came time, when I was doing this book, he was one of the first people I thought of. I said, "Do you want to take part in this?" He's like, "Absolutely, man." He's like, "Somebody's got to do this. I'm glad it's you." And Jeff, I interviewed him in the book for how he got started. He ended up doing a fan site when the internet was just, coming around, like I don't know if it was a GeoCities, but it was like what did he call them? Like a music board, or like a message board. He started.
Like an AOL message board. I remember they used to have those.
Yeah, like in the mid 90s, early days, right, for this sort of thing. Like not every band had a website at this point. And a friend of Dave Meniketti's came across it and brought it to Dave's attention. So he ended up meeting Jeff and say, "Hey, we're putting together a website. Do you want to help us with it?" So it went from there. So he knows those guys very well.
The official site, YNTRocks.com, a quote from Ronnie James Dio: "Meniketti is one of the most underrated singers on the face of the earth." High praise from Ronnie James Dio.
Yeah. That's why he featured him so prominently on the Hearing Aid song, right? And, there's a quote. I have the Contagious 12-inch single, and it's got like a little blurb on the back of it. And Eddie Van Halen is quoted as saying something like, "I've been all around the world, and there ain't enough good rock bands like Y&T."
Wow.
So like those Rob Halford sang their praises all the time. Like I said, Dee Snider, they're well respected within the hard rock community. Another footnote is that Motley Crue's first ever show was opening for Y&T in 1981. And, say what you will about the guys in Motley Crue. 4 years later, they did return the favor, because they had Y&T open for at least a part of the Theater of Pain tour. So, and that's one of the other things that kind of irks me a little bit. Like now, these, musicians that ended up in bands that did better than Y&T are all singing their praises. But when I was buying Metal Edge and Circus and Hit Parader in the late 80s and early 90s, so especially the early 90s when I got into the band, nobody talked about Y&T. And if you know that yourself, like when a band would talk about another band, I would listen.
Yeah.
I might not necessarily get into it, but my ears would be tweaked a little bit. That's one of the reasons I got into Queen, because Def Leppard, Metallica, Extreme. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be more to this band than Another One Bites the Dust. You know what I mean? Like I just wasn't hearing the right things. And look what Metallica did for bands like Diamond Head. Like nobody, forgotten bands, and now they're, in the metal community. Oh, Diamond Head, yeah. So, I wish someone had thrown Y&T a bone that way, and said, "Hey, this is a great band." But something that came up in this documentary, and it is mentioned in the book too, because it is significant and it's very unfortunate. But the longer that they were around, their experience started to work against them, because, when you've been at it that long and you hadn't really broken through within the industry, like radio programmers and record company people were like, these guys again, they haven't knocked it on the head yet. And, it's sad, but I talk about this too, and I think it's true. When grunge happened, I sort of call it the great leveling when it comes to traditional hard rock and, what used to be called old school metal. There was kind of a leveling period where everybody was, affected in some ways. I mean, even bands as big as Def Leppard were knocked down to gold status at that time. I mean, it really knocked the wind out of the scene. Now, Y&T, it just so happens, kind of sat that out, because they played their last shows at the end of 1990, and then they took a hiatus for 5 years. So they were kind of immune. They didn't really have that. Dave was building his own studio and things like that. But, when they really started touring heavily around 2003, and there's a good reason that it happened when it did, they started playing all these festivals like Sweden Rock and, places like that, and started to, people were just loving seeing Y&T live. Now they can go on like the rock cruises and do as well or better as bands that, went way past them in sales, way past them up the charts. And, there's such a respect now. I just think that that perseverance has paid off, because Dave Meniketti is still out there. He's 70 years old and he still sings really well. Like, wow. He's kept his vocal chops up. I mean, yeah, he's 70 years old. He's not singing like he did when he was in his late 20s, early 30s, but he's still delivering. And there's singers that are much younger than him that cannot do anything close to what they used to do. So
if you live in California, you can see him Friday, July 19th, Ventura Music Hall, and then the 20th they're in San Juan Capistrano, California, Coach House Concert Hall, and then Friday, August 9, Berkeley, California, Cornerstone Craft Beer and Live Music. There you go. Free plug for some upcoming Y&T dates. Yeah.
And unfortunately, here I am in the easternmost part of Canada, which is a terrible place when it comes to classic rock bands, because they just don't hit this area, unfortunately. So I've never seen them, live.
Oh, isn't that
yeah,
what a bummer.
I think the closest that Y&T ever came to playing here was in '85. When they were opening for Motley Crue. They played in Portland, Maine. That's about 8 hours away, or 6 hours away from me. And I've been to Portland many times to see shows. So I'd have made that trip if they'd, if they'd gone there now and played a theater somewhere, I'd be there. But
yeah, Mr.
Meniketti, you got to go where the fans are, right?
If you're listening, Mr. Meniketti.
Listen, I had the privilege, because I did an entire deep dive series on Y&T's albums to go with the book, like I'm doing now for my Kansas book. But I went through each of the studio albums, and then after that was the privilege of getting John Nyman and Aaron Lee both on the show, because they both had solo albums up to talk about. So I had them both on. So I had half of Y&T on. So they're very aware. They've both bought the book, which is amazing. I mean, that's, so they are aware. And I've talked to Jeff Keir a lot, and you know what? I hold out hope. I'm going to get a copy of that book to Dave, because I mean, obviously, he's the keeper of the flame, right? He's the last remaining original member. He's the main guy. He always has been. So yeah, he's the guy to, hopefully get in some contact with him. But
that would be cool. Yeah. That would be cool. Yeah, let's go through some of the albums here. We did touch on that first one just a bit, the self-titled debut. And then the second album, what bums me out, those first two albums you can't get on Spotify. So they're on YouTube, and you can, and it's too bad, because they're really, really good albums. Now, the discussion among the Y&T diehards, when you get to that second album, is regarding the producer, right? Jimmy Robinson on the second one. So yeah, this is a topic of this discussion. Fans weren't too happy with the production. What are your overall thoughts on the first two albums?
I love the first album. First album is really raw, off the floor. It sounds like you're in the room with them. It's great. It's an album like if you were to put a metronome, that would be a terrible thing because the music breathes. I'm not saying it's sloppy, but it's not. John Bonham, if you put him to a metronome, it slows down and speeds up as the music dictates. So um, first album's fantastic, and I love the way it sounds. The second album, Struck Down, is actually my personal least favorite Y&T album. But something always has to come in last. Not everything can be tied for first place. I think it's got a few good songs on it. It's got some songs I don't particularly care for, but yeah, the production is like Flange City. It's just drowning in flange.
I noticed
And
that.
yeah, it's a very noisy, difficult album, but yes, there are some quality songs on there. To me, my favorite Y&T albums, if I had to pick my top three, would be Earthshaker in '81, the first A&M album. That's a killer album. That's a lot of people's favorite. Main Streak in '83, amazing album. And I've got a soft spot for 10 in 1990, which is their most commercial, like their most overtly, well, maybe not their most commercial, but it's it's definitely more of a commercial. It's not metal in the least, but I really like it. But that's when I got into the band. So it's really hard to separate because there's always something about what was current when you got into them, and that was the one.
Well, they were working hard. A new album,
Very.
studio album released every year from '81 to '85.
Yeah, they were
And
very,
you
very,
named
they were very
few of them.
prolific.
Yeah, Earthshaker '81, Black Tiger '82, Mean Streak '83, and Rock We Trust '84, Down for the Count '85, and then you got the live album Open Fire in '85.
Yeah,
Earthshaker, a solid album, and then that gets them off to a great start to the '80s. But this is when they opened for AC/DC, right?
Yeah, they opened for, and here's one of
For those
the
about
issues.
to rock tour.
They opened for AC/DC in Europe, but they didn't open for them in North America, their home. So that's one of the things that maybe could have gone a little bit different. So they're quite well known in the UK. They did very well in Japan. Pockets, right? And I got to say, I'm so glad that they have an audience in Japan because it was really, really hard finding all of these albums in the early 90s. And if it wasn't for Japan, I wouldn't have any of those on CD like back then because all you could ever order were Japanese imports.
Where did you order them from? Because this is pre-internet.
Okay, so this is a good story that happens to be a Y&T oriented story. So by the summer of '91, I mean, after they were already broken up, and that's another story because I've done that so many times. I'll get into a band and they break up. Anyway, so summer '91, I had Contagious, 10, and a compilation called Best of '81 to '85 that came out in 1990 on A&M because that's former labels do that all the time. Like look at Aerosmith, Geffen, Columbia, they'll put something out, right?
And that's still out. That's on Spotify.
Standard practice. So I had those three on CD, and I had everything back to Black Tiger on cassette. I couldn't find the first three albums anywhere. I distinctly remember that I was in a grocery store and I was looking at a Circus magazine. It was a voracious, steady reader of Circus at that time. And in the back of the magazine, there was an order form for a place in Connecticut called The Right Choice. And they sold rare import CDs.
I'm in Connecticut.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's where this place was. I don't think it exists anymore, but
Right Choice?
I think it was called The Right Choice. I could be getting it mixed up with something else. But I do remember they had a listing for Earthshaker on CD, which I didn't have on anything. It was $39.99. And that's in US, and I'm up here in Canada. But to be fair, at that time, the exchange rate wasn't that bad. I think the Canadian dollar was like 82 cents US. So it was, it's not like it is now where our dollar doesn't get you very far in the States. But anyway, I thought, man, I'd love to order that. But, you're skeptical, right? I didn't know anybody that ordered from these places. So I remember talking to a friend of mine, my buddy John, who I've had on my show before. He's in the Y&T book too. I got him to list his favorite riffs.
Yes, so that's a cool section.
Yeah. Because he's a guitar player too. So anyway, I said to John, I said, oh man, I don't know. What if it's a scam? That it came to about $50 Canadian to order it. And I thought, man, what if it's, and so what he did, it was kind of brilliant. He bought the cassette single, if anybody remembers cassette singles, to Metallica 1, because that had the Prince on the other side of it, which is a Diamond Head song, and we hadn't heard it at that time, and it was less than $10. So he thought, what the heck? I mean, I'll order this. If it comes, it comes, and then we'll know. So that's exactly how it went. So I ordered Earthshaker, and I remember getting it. I'd never seen the cover before. I knew 4 of the 10 songs on it because they're on that best of. But that's when I knew that, okay, it's legit. These places I can actually get some of these things on CD, not just cassette, because I was just transitioning from cassettes to CDs at that point. I have just the fondest memories of getting that album and listening to it all the time because it's so amazingly good. It regularly gets mentioned as people's favorite of their albums.
Yeah, Earthshaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, Black Tiger has a song that I love, though, that the toggle switch helicopter effect that Manichetti does on the title track. Yeah, and Martin Popoff compares Dave to Ronnie Montrose as far as the guitar style, which is interesting.
And it really, there's a lot to that. There's so many. It's a Bay Area. There's so many Bay Area connections. Because I already mentioned that Dave's kind of got that Hagar-ish voice a little bit. But as a guitar player, yeah, I mean, that first Montrose album was hugely influential. I mean, it took 13 years to go platinum, but people that were in the know knew how great it was.
It still sounds so good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You listen to it today.
How many people have covered songs from it? How many people have covered Rock Candy and Bad Motor Scooter? I mean, I could go down a whole other rabbit hole about that.
I'm going to see
solo stuff and stuff like that.
I'm going to see Sammy in a couple of weeks here in Connecticut.
Oh man, I wish that tour was coming near me. I would love to go see that.
I am hoping that I think he'll pull out a Montrose tune, but it's going to be like 90% Van Halen.
I think he'll at least do Bad Motor Scooter. That's my.
Yeah.
But so the connections there. I mean, they're 4-piece band, so you've got that. But let me think about that. Ronnie Montrose was actually going to produce the 10 album. And they have a couple of CDs that they put out in the early 2000s, Unearthed Volume 1 and 2. Volume 2 has quite a few songs from those sessions that Ronnie Montrose actually produced. And there's one song on there called New Kid in Town that Ronnie wrote, and it's on one of his albums. I don't know which one, but so it's a song that Y&T recorded, but there's also I don't think it's on the Mean album from '87. I think it's on one of Ronnie's albums. I don't know. I don't have any of Ronnie's solo albums, but yeah, he came very close to producing Y&T, and that stuff sounds really good. But the label's like, no, we need a bigger name producer. It ended up being Mike Stone. So there's a connection there. But in 2013, when Sammy, he was doing a 4 Decades of Rock tour, and Ronnie Montrose had passed away at this point, and he had a set where I'm pretty sure he had Denny Carmassi and Bill Church come up to do some Montrose songs. He had Dave play lead guitar. You can see it on YouTube.
Yeah. That's where where I remember that name from then.
When they did Rock Candy, Dave sang the second verse, which is really cool because then you get to hear the two of them side by side singing. So yeah, definitely connections there.
Cool. Yeah, I remember that tour too. So I'm going to check that out on YouTube because I got to go back and watch that. But it's interesting because you talk about the commercial success or lack thereof by Y&T. They were rising as you go through the 80s, right? First half of the 80s, Mean Street cracks the Billboard 200 103 and Rock We Trust is 45. And then they got the huge hit single with Summertime Girls. But as for that song, I find this interesting because a lot of times the band's biggest hit single may not be the favorite of a diehard fan like
Right.
Jump, right? But
Hmm.
you are a fan. In fact, you said it should have been an even bigger hit.
I think it's a great pop rock song, and there's no reason why, you know, it's like, um, I'm a huge Night Ranger fan, and I've never gotten sick of hearing Sister Christian on the radio.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just, um, the problem is that with Y&T, when you're supposed to be a hard rock band, people expect, I don't know. And incidentally, you're talking about Dio. That's Claude Schnell that plays the keyboards on those songs that have the keyboards on for Y&T. So
Okay. He's on
yeah,
Summertime Girls.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
that's
And
another
it
thing
hit
with A&M.
55 on Billboard, which isn't bad, but
Yeah, it's just respectable. It hit 16 on the mainstream rock chart. So yeah, it was getting airplay. But here's another example of where I think A&M kind of dropped the ball, because it came out on Open Fire. It was the lone studio song on a live album that came out in, I want to say, May or June of 85. It was like first part of 85. And that's really when Summertime Girls was getting the airplay and on the charts. And they stuck it again on Down for the Count, which was their final studio album for A&M, which didn't come out until November of 85. By then, Summertime Girls had completely fallen off the charts. And who's going to make their first purchase of a group a live album full of songs they've never heard before, for the most part? Doesn't make any sense. I just, there's a lot of logic, and the whole story about Summertime Girls, explained very well in the documentary, is that one A&M exec heard the song because they've kind of worked it up, doing jam session. And by the way, if you ever hear the song live, it's all guitars. There's no keyboards in it. That makes it even cooler. I don't mind the studio version, but I'm just saying they can do it live, and it sounds like it should. But this A&M exec heard is like, that's terrible, and kicked the cassette across the parking lot. Then, so they didn't think anything more of it, and so then they did start playing it live, and they the label sent a recording truck out, or however that goes, to record live shows. And another exec from A&M heard that song, go, well, wait a minute, what's that? What's that song? That sounds like a hit. So, I've always wished that from the beginning. I mean, they had London in the first couple of albums, but instead of signed to A&M, I always wondered what it would have been like if they'd assigned to Elektra or Atlantic. Labels that kind of knew how to market these types of bands. It could have been a very different story.
which label were they on for 87's Contagious?
Geffen.
Geffen. Okay. Because they reached number 78 with that album, which isn't bad.
Here's the problem with that. There's a couple things. And
yeah, I want to ask you about that first
lot.
single too, because you feel that first single should have been huge.
Oh my goodness, that was a slam dunk hit as far as I'm concerned.
That's we're talking about. What's the name of the song?
It's Contagious. It's the title song.
Yeah, the title track. Yeah. Okay. Sorry,
Super
go ahead.
Catchy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a super catchy song. I mean, yeah.
Jimmy DeGrasso on drums, by the way, on that album.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. Geffen was a great hard rock label. They're proven track record.
Yeah.
Sammy, they resurrected Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, Tesla, Whitesnake. The problem is that Contagious came out right around the same time that the Whitesnake album was kind of like siphoning all promotional dollars out of Geffen, as big a label as they were, which is understandable if you know the story behind that, because John David Kolodner, the famous A&R guy from Geffen, basically staked his reputation on breaking Whitesnake, and it was not an easy thing. Band members being replaced, and the tension with Coverdale and Sykes and all that stuff.
Yeah, the people on the album are not in the ones in the video, and who toured.
Big time promotion for that album, right? Appetite for Destruction comes out around that same time, and yes, that album took about a year or more to really take off, but Geffen was pushing it from the start. Y&T kind of fell in between the cracks, unfortunately. And again, there was that misconception of, geez, they've been around a long time, and if they haven't made it by now, but it certainly didn't stop David Coverdale from becoming bigger than he'd ever been. And it certainly didn't stop Aerosmith from becoming bigger than they've ever been. So why didn't Y&T, why couldn't they have worked them a little bit longer? The other problem I think with Contagious is there was no real clear-cut second single, because you couldn't just count on that one song doing it. And I think that's what all the execs at Geffen did. They heard the song Contagious and said, that's it. That's a hit. That's all we need to worry about. Do whatever else you want in the album, and it'll sort itself out. And it didn't. It just didn't. It only hit 42 in mainstream rock, which is crazy. But record label stuff, man. I mean, every band's got a story about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it's timing too.
Yeah. Timing. Yeah.
We mentioned Sammy Hagar, interesting bit of trivia regarding this album, and it's the track LA Rocks, right? It had a different title.
Yeah. You can get pressings of the album, and the second song on Contagious is called Boys Night Out. I used to have a cassette. Well, I don't know what happened to it. I used to have a cassette version where it was listed as Boys Night Out. But yeah, Sammy had a song on his 87 album, his Contractual Obligation album, with that title. And for some reason, that meant that Y&T ended up having to change it. I don't know why. I actually think LA Rocks is a cooler title.
Yeah. That's the song Sammy mentions Eddie. Me and Eddie get into a fight. Those are in the lyrics to that song. Yeah. That's off of Never Say Goodbye.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who knew there was so much of a Sammy Hagar connection here as we weave in and out of the
well,
Y&T
I was really glad
career.
that they talked to him for the documentary, because it was cool to see him give his 2 cents and talk about what a great band they were. So, and they opened for him, I think in '83, probably would have been the 3 Lockbox tour.
Well,
so yeah.
Speaking of great Canadian rock bands, Sammy's bringing out for this tour Loverboy.
Yeah, and that's so cool too, right? Because Loverboy also opened for they opened for Van Halen on some of the Canadian dates on the 5150 tour, and of course, diehard fans will know Mike Reno duets with Sammy on "Remember the Heroes."
Great tune.
Yeah, how cool would that be if they brought that song back into the set and had him come out?
Yeah, maybe he will.
That'd
be cool. Yeah, that'd be cool.
If I was get a great big band of "Remember the Heroes,"
yeah,
and it'd be like, oh yeah,
yeah, it's a great song. Yeah, one more album before the band splits up in '91, and that's 10. You've been talking about that one. Journey. Steve Smith plays drums on some of the tracks, along with Jimmy DeGrasso. Joey Alves had left the band in most of the tracks. Yeah. Joey Alves had left the band, was replaced on rhythm guitar by Steph Burns. The album peaked at 110. 4 years later, the quartet of singer guitarist Dave Manichetti, bassist Phil Kennemore, drummer Jimmy DeGrasso, and guitarist Steph Burns reunite for 2 albums. So these are interesting albums. The 90s Y&T, Musically Incorrect in 95, and Endangered Species was, I believe, 2 years later?
97, yep.
Okay, so for you, 95's Musically Incorrect was extra special since you had become a fan when the band split up. So for you, this was cool.
So I bought 10 when it had been out for a couple of months. And I bought the best of as soon as I knew it existed. And I bought their live album, Yesterday and Today Live, which came out in 91, which I would, if somebody wanted to start with the live album, start with that one. They just reissued it last year with 2 extra songs. Get that one. But yeah.
But then they're done.
Correct was the first studio album that I was anticipating. Yeah. And it wasn't until 96 that I could track down a copy of it.
Yeah, interesting album cover too. The 2 little kids are blocking their ears.
Stock photo. Yeah, it's a stock photo that DeGrasso found in a library.
Okay.
And the title was very apt because it's like, bands like us, we're musically incorrect as far as the industry is concerned, but we're doing it anyway.
Yeah, and then the 12th and last studio album, Face Melter, 2010. The first, their first since 87's Endangered Species. The longest gap between 2 Y&T studio albums. Do I have that right? Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, and so far we're going on 14 years, and it's still the newest studio album. I hope they do something else. I really do.
Yeah, or 97's Endangered Species. Sorry. Yeah. Last to feature bassist Phil Kennemore, sadly passed.
Yeah.
Following year, and then you mentioned in the book, it's hard not to get emotional when listening to the album opening track, Prelude, and not get emotional that opening
Yeah,
track
he does.
on.
Yeah, he's, it's filled as a spoken word intro on that. He was really, really passionate about that album. That album was his baby. And, he saw it to fruition. Unfortunately, he couldn't complete the tour. That's when they got Brad Lang. But the story about Steve Smith playing on 10 is a fascinating one
Tell me about
because,
that one. Yeah.
yeah, um, again, the documentary goes into so much detail about that. But Jimmy DeGrasso was mad at Mike Stone, the producer. And Jimmy's a great drummer. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Jimmy is only credited on 3 of the 12 songs on 10. Steve Smith plays on 3/4 of that album, but they had Steve Smith for the documentary talking to him, and he was so classy about it, because it was, it would be a revolting situation for the drummer. This happens a lot, especially to drummers for some reason. For some reason, recording in the studio is a different animal than recording live. I mean, Fred Coury, happened to Fred Coury with Cinderella. There's a lot of bands that happens to where it's, there's a lot of times where it's not the band, it's session guys, right? Because it's a young band. This is not a young band. And Jimmy DeGrasso is a good drummer, great drummer. But Mike Stone, I guess, had a reputation of, not taking very good care of himself. He died young. He died in 2002. I think he was only 50. But Mike Stone, of course, had worked with Journey. So that was probably why he said, get Steve Smith in here, because Steve Smith is, he's not just a good rock drummer. He's just this master musician, right? Could play anything in a drop of a hat. But what he did and what he told Jimmy, he wrote out Jimmy's drum parts. And he said, I'm not going to here and just do whatever. I'm going to play your parts because you came up with some cool parts. Like, that was just so much respect. I'm a Journey fan anyway, but I just said so much more respect for Steve Smith after that. I'm like, that is so classy how he handled that. So yeah, it is a different sound. It's definitely a different sound. You can tell the tracks that Jimmy played on because he plays like a hard rock drummer, and Steve Smith just plays like he does. He's got that lighter touch, right? He's fantastic, but you can tell it's a different feel. It's a different sound. He doesn't hit as hard. But of course, I didn't know that when I first got the album. I wasn't as savvy. I'd like to think I've learned a few things since then. But yeah, that was a really interesting story. And the two albums in the mid '90s were really good. Of course, they were on smaller labels, so they even had, they're hard to find now, I think. And I think Face Melter, I think you can still get Face Melter on the band's website. The problem is with Face Melter, and I'm not going to call it a problem so much as you kind of have to get 2 different versions of it to get all the songs, unless you buy the vinyl, because they did a bonus track for Japan and a bonus track for Europe.
Yeah,
so
yeah, Losing My Mind in Europe. That was the bonus
Deceiver
track
for Japan. Yeah,
Deadly Deceiver,
they're
Japanese.
both good songs. My opinion, my humble opinion, they're better than some of the songs that made the proper album. But hey,
okay, well, but the song "I'm Coming Home" I thought was interesting. Reading online
awesome.
that it's the most viewed video on YouTube, but from the band, over 2 million views.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, because it's a small fan base, but it's a dedicated one, and that's their, it was their first new music in 13 years. It was their first new video since 1990, and it's a really cool looking video. The band looks great and it's classy. It's well done, and I just think people were tuning in a lot when that came out. Yeah. And Y&T, like a lot of bands, not all of their videos have aged that well, but most bands from the 80s, they have videos that you look back, even if the songs are great, that video. So
yeah. Well, I want to finish now with a sort of like a rapid fire series of questions regarding Y&T's catalog. Okay, so let's start with. Well, I think you already may answer this, but Y&T's best album.
Okay, well, my favorite album is 10, but their best album is probably Mean Streak.
Okay, that's like a unanimous choice too among Y&T fans.
Or Earthshaker, one of those two.
Best song.
I'm going to say Don't Stop Running.
From which album?
From In Rock We Trust. I think that's the best combination of hard rock and melody and guitar and vocal prowess and vocal harmonies. I think that sums up Y&T pretty good in one song.
Okay. Best album cover. Dracula
Um,
making out with a robot. What's that one? That's is that which one is that
Definitely
down
not
for the
down for the count.
count?
No, definitely not that one.
Yeah,
You know
Dracula's
what?
biting a robot's
Say
neck.
I'm gonna say Mean Streak. Mean Streak is just a stunning, stunning album cover.
Okay.
It's so the mechanical snake and
You're
the
right, yeah.
logo looks awesome. And yeah,
Do we know who did the cover art?
John Taylor Dismukes.
Okay. All right. Best Dave Meniketti riff.
Man, he's had so many. I mean, the Mean Streak riff is really cool. It's kind of a twisty, turny thing. But if we're just talking about the power of a pure power chord riff, I'm going to say Black Tiger.
Black Tiger, okay. Which that's one of my favorites now. And that's got that helicopter sound.
And if you like that sound, I'll tell you right now where else you can hear it.
Okay.
Straight to the Heart on Mean Streak, he does it. Life, Life, Life on In Rock We Trust. Anything for Money on Down for the Count, and Eyes of a Stranger on Contagious. They all have. So what he does is, for your guitar player, like he always usually played a Les Paul. So he would turn the pickup so that one pickup wasn't active and the other one was. So the toggle switch would go back and forth between active and inactive. So it would cut out. And that's how he came up with that. Now people do it with foot switches and stuff, but he'll wear that toggle switch down to, if you see him play, he's still got the same, like, he comes on stage. I don't know if you can tell from that picture, but he's got the sunburst Les Paul, but some of the finish is worn off. I mean, some guys just have that guitar that they stick to all the time, just like Brad Gillis from Night Ranger. He's got that red and black Strat, and it's all worn down, and it's so cool.
Most underrated Y&T album.
I'm going to say Endangered Species, just because by virtue of the fact that smaller label albums just rarely get their due.
And finally, the most underrated Y&T song.
Most underrated Y&T song. Yeah, because, I mean, within the fan community, songs like Mean Streak, Black Tiger, Don't Stop Running, those are, quote unquote hits for fans. But an underrated song, boy, making me think here.
Contagious?
You know what? I'm gonna go with Contagious was a single.
It was
so
a
that
single.
Kind of takes it out of the running.
LA Rocks?
LA Rocks is pretty good, but I am okay. It was a single and a video, but again, smaller label. I'm gonna go with I'm Coming Home, because that shows that after all the years of not recording and being around as long as they had, they can still deliver songs that are heavy yet melodic and just pack everything in.
Here we go. Down for the Count, the Y&T album review. That is out now. You can find it wherever books are sold, Amazon, and
Amazon. That's basically where you find it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And you also have a brand new book out, which we want to have you back on for. That's Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review. So you can look for that one too. Another kick-ass book cover,
Same size book, except the Kansas book's a little longer. I find this is a very, very good size to print books, and it's not too big.
Yep.
And
who did the cover art for the Kansas book?
That is my good friend Matt Phillips with some AI assistance.
All right. Give him props for that, man. That's a beauty.
Yeah. With a lot of tweaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, where can people find you online, on YouTube?
Tim's Vinyl Confessions is, my name on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. And most recently, I joined TikTok.
You did.
I don't really understand TikTok, but I'm working on it.
Your wife talked you into it.
She did.
You're going to do like those crazy dances,
I did. You know what? It's funny you mentioned that. I wouldn't call it a dance, but I did a trailer recently for an episode which will have aired by this time, and I just did an iMovie on my phone, but it looks like a horror movie trailer.
Yeah,
I had a lot of fun with that, so I might get into doing stuff like that.
You mentioned today, I was just watching you put up a short, which we can even mention here too. It does you a huge favor if people can get on Amazon and give these books a good review. and also, take a picture of yourself with the book and put it up on social media. Cause
You
like you
know,
say, this is just you here.
yeah.
You don't have, like Harper Collins behind you
I don't know. Yeah, I don't
pushing the
have
book.
Weimer in the UK like Martin does.
Right.
It's yeah, and I thank you, and people like yourself having me on. Word of mouth is everything. I'm just a one guy. I don't have an agent. I don't have a publisher. So yeah, if people like the book, please leave a review on Amazon. It may not sound like much, but it keeps the book. It'll keep it in people's suggestions. It keeps it up there. Like when this first came out, it was #1, I think, in recorded sound for a day, which was pretty cool, but
Yep.
didn't stay there, right? New books are coming out all the time. So leaving a review is a great way to help out with that. And if you out there have a book of your own, I will leave a review for you. So yeah, it's sharing and posting. People like seeing people with the books for some reason. It seems to make a difference. So
Cool.
I really appreciate all the support so far. But yeah, um, I put a lot into these books, and it means a lot. If I do a book on a band, it's a band that I love and I think are worth checking into. And when people like yourself say, "Yeah, I listen to more of their music," that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll hopefully have you back on. It's mid-July right now. So maybe, middle to late August, we'll have you back on and we'll talk about the Kansas book. I'm really looking forward to that one. And so is my sister, because she's a huge Kansas fan.
Awesome, awesome.
Told her,
Thank
I
you.
said, yeah, I got an author of a book on Kansas coming up. So she's loving that. So, all right,
That's
Tim.
great.
All right. Thanks so much, man.